Step away from the table. The order cut across the trauma bay like a rifle crack. The monitor screamed. A flat, unbroken tone. He's in arrest, the nurse said, already reaching for the paddles. Charging to 200, I said step away. Boots hit tile. 3 Navy SEALs closed in around the gurney, not touching her, but close enough to make the point. The chief stood at the foot of the bed. Broad shoulders. Combat trident. Eyes that didn't blink. You don't touch him without my authorization. He doesn't have a pulse, she snapped. I'm not asking permission to restart his heart. A flicker of movement behind her, hesitation from the tech. Waiting. Not on her. On him. The imbalance settled over the room instantly. Rank versus rankless. Combat authority versus a rookie nurse with a fresh commission bar. Lower your voice, the chief said quietly. She didn't. Clear, she called, pressing the paddles down. His hand clamped over her wrist before she could discharge. Not violent. Unyielding. You will stand down. The flatline droned louder in the silence that followed. Across the room, a physician opened his mouth, then closed it. The SEALs lining the wall didn't speak. Their presence was enough. The patient lay pale under surgical lights. Blood dried at the collarbone. Dog tags resting still against unmoving skin. 5 seconds. 10. Chief, we are losing him, the doctor said carefully. You lost him when you started guessing, the chief replied, eyes never leaving hers. Her jaw tightened. This isn't guessing. It's ACLS protocol. You are out of your depth. The words landed harder than the grip on her wrist. The monitor gave a weak flicker. Then nothing. The chief released her slowly. You touch him again without clearance, he said, and you're done in this room. The power imbalance was complete. And the patient was still flatlining. He capped to context and character grounding, almost equals 920 words. The trauma bay at Naval Medical Center San Diego had been locked down within minutes of the helicopter landing. 2 black SUVs idled outside the emergency entrance. Armed base security stood inside the double doors. Hallway traffic rerouted. Civilian staff quietly displaced. The man on the table wasn't just any patient. Senior Chief Marcus Hale. Navy SEAL sniper. Multiple combat deployments. Classified commendations. A reputation that traveled faster than his name. The accident had happened offshore during a classified training evolution. Equipment malfunction. Internal injuries. Emergency surgery en route. Cardiac instability post-op. He arrived surrounded by his platoon. And by Chief Ethan Calloway. Calloway had 22 years in the teams. Bronze Star. Combat Action Ribbon. The kind of presence that didn't require raised volume. When he stepped into a space, it adjusted around him. In the hospital, technically, he had no medical authority. In reality, no one in that room ignored him. Lieutenant Commander Robert Grant oversaw the trauma team. He wore the right insignia. Held the right billet. But when Calloway spoke, Grant measured his words. Hierarchy has layers. Some aren't printed on paper. Nurse Ava Ramirez stood on the opposite side of that invisible line. 3 months out of commissioning. Top clinical scores. Calm in simulations. Unproven in front of decorated warfighters staring her down. She noticed everything. The way the SEALs positioned themselves near exits. The way staff avoided eye contact with them. The way Grant deferred without appearing to defer. Potassium's elevated, she said quietly, scanning the monitor. We're looking at electrical instability. Grant nodded, but his eyes flicked toward Calloway. We stabilized in the ore, Grant replied. We monitor and reassess. Monitor. Reassess. Words that sounded safe. The monitor shrieked again. Flatline. Ava didn't hesitate this time. She reached for the defibrillator. Calloway stepped closer. No shocks until we confirm underlying cause. She met his gaze. Cardiac arrest is the underlying cause. A few of the seals shifted. Not aggressive. Just present. Protective. To them, she wasn't a clinician. She was an outsider leaning over their brother. Calloway's voice stayed level. You don't understand the full medical profile. Then brief me, she replied. A flicker of tension. The chart had redacted sections. Restricted notes. Compartmentalized medical history tied to classified deployments. She didn't have clearance for everything. But she had clearance to treat. Grant adjusted his gloves again. Chief, with respect, this is a medical facility. And with respect, Commander, this is a Tier 1 operator with a history you don't fully grasp. The room felt smaller. The unspoken message was clear, you are temporary. He is not. Ava stepped closer to the table anyway. Her voice stayed controlled. If we delay, we reduce survival odds by 7 to 10% per minute. No one responded. The flatline tone continued. Authority in that room wasn't determined by stethoscopes. It was determined by combat credibility. And she had none. Keycap 3 escalation of authority abuse, almost equals 1050 words, document that I ordered a pause. Calloway's tone shifted from protective to procedural. That was new. Grant stiffened. Chief, that places liability, it places responsibility where it belongs. On the surface, it sounded professional. Underneath, it was control. Ava felt the shift immediately. This wasn't just hesitation anymore. It was command override. Charge to 200, she repeated. The tech's hands hovered over the machine. Waiting. Calloway didn't raise his voice. He simply said, belay that. And the tech obeyed him. Not her. Publicly. The humiliation wasn't loud. It was precise. Ava's throat tightened, but she didn't show it. She moved to start chest compressions instead. Calloway stepped into her space again. You will not proceed. Her hand stopped mid-motion. Sir, she said carefully, he has no cardiac output. You are escalating risk. I am following protocol. You are following a textbook. Each sentence cut shorter than the last. The seals along the wall watched in silence. One of them folded his arms. Another shifted his jaw, uncertain now. The monitor emitted a faint electrical flicker. Hope. Then flatline again. Grant finally spoke with force. Chief, this is my trauma bay. Calloway turned slowly toward him. And that is my operator. The room divided cleanly. Medical chain of command. Operational chain of command. Ava moved again toward the paddles. Calloway intercepted her, not grabbing this time, but placing himself between her and the patient. A physical barrier. Step back, he said. It wasn't a request. For a split second, she looked smaller than she felt. Rookie nurse. Surrounded. Overruled. But she didn't step back. Her jaw set. Every second you block intervention increases neurological damage. Calloway's expression hardened. You will address me properly. There it was. Not about the patient. About authority. Yes, Chief, she said, the words controlled but tight. With respect, you are obstructing life-saving treatment. A ripple of tension moved through the seals. That line had crossed into dangerous territory. Calloway's voice lowered further. You are speaking beyond your station. The statement was deliberate. Rank correction. Public. Grant inhaled sharply. Chief, enough. The monitor gave another weak, dying pulse. Then silence. Ava looked at the tech again. Charge. The tech hesitated. Calloway didn't speak. He didn't have to. The tech's hands dropped. That was the clearest escalation yet. Medical staff deferring to a non-medical authority out of intimidation. Ava felt heat rise to her face. Not fear. Frustration. The chief leaned closer. You will stand down. The room held its breath. And the flatline continued. The trauma bay doors were locked from the inside. Not standard protocol. But tonight wasn't standard. Outside the glass, 2 base security officers stood at rigid attention. Down the corridor, civilian patients were quietly rerouted. The hum of the hospital continued, but this wing felt sealed off, contained. Inside, the air carried the sharp scent of antiseptic and jet fuel. Senior Chief Marcus Hale lay motionless under surgical lights, chest rising mechanically with assisted ventilation. His dog tags rested against pale skin marked by recent sutures. A faded trident tattoo curved along his ribcage, ink worn from years in salt water and sun. 3 Navy SEALs stood along the wall. Not speaking. Not sitting. Watching. Chief Ethan Calloway stood closest to the bed. He didn't wear a cover indoors, but authority clung to him anyway. His uniform sleeves were rolled with precise symmetry. A small stack of ribbons sat above his left pocket, nothing flashy, just earned. He tracked every movement in the room. When a monitor beeped irregularly, his eyes shifted before anyone else reacted. Lieutenant Commander Robert Grant adjusted his gloves again. It was a subtle tell, he did it when weighing risk. Naval medical insignia on his collar. Years of trauma rotations behind him. But this wasn't a normal trauma-teen dynamic. Every clinical decision felt observed. Measured. Ava Ramirez stood on the patient's right side, chart tablet balanced against her forearm. Her commissioning bar still shone too brightly, edges not yet dulled by time. She kept her posture straight, chin level. BP's drifting, she said quietly. Grant nodded once. Increase fluids. Carefully. Calloway's voice entered the space without rising. He was stable during transport. Ava didn't look up. Transport isn't surgery recovery, Chief. The word chief wasn't casual. It was precise. Respectful. Formal. She had learned quickly that rank mattered here, even in scrubs. One of the SEALs shifted, boots scraping tile softly. Another checked his watch, then the monitor. They didn't question the medical team directly. They didn't need to. Their presence was a reminder, this patient belonged to them first. Grant stepped toward the foot of the bed. We're monitoring cardiac rhythm. There were complications offshore. Calloway paused a fraction of a second too long. Equipment malfunction during dive training. Ava caught the phrasing. Clean. Controlled. Incomplete. She'd already noticed sections of Hale's chart were restricted. Redacted blocks where detailed history should have been. Access denied beyond her clearance level. That wasn't unusual with special operations. But it changed the weight of every decision. Electrolytes were unstable post-op, she said, eyes scanning the screen. We need to stay ahead of that. Calloway's gaze settled on her then. Assessing. She could feel it. Not personal. Professional scrutiny. You've handled Tier 1 before, he asked. It wasn't hostile. But it wasn't neutral either. Ava met his eyes briefly. I've handled cardiac instability before. Grant cleared his throat softly, redirecting. This facility supports all fleet units, Chief. The correction was gentle. But clear. Military hierarchy didn't disappear inside a hospital, it just rearranged itself. Calloway gave a slight nod. Understood. The word sounded cooperative. It wasn't concession. One of the monitors flickered. A subtle arrhythmic pattern danced across the screen. Ava stepped closer, adjusting a lead. He's irritable electrically. Grant moved beside her. Prepare magnesium. A tech reached for the medication tray. Then hesitated. Just briefly. Eyes flicking toward Calloway. The pause lasted less than a second. But Ava saw it. Grant saw it too. Calloway didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Authority radiated without volume. Ava's voice remained steady. Magnesium now. The tech complied this time. Small victory. Unspoken. Calloway stepped to the side of the bed, lowering his voice. He's been through worse than this. Ava adjusted the foreline. The heart doesn't care about deployment history. One of the SEALs exhaled sharply at that. Not anger. Just tension. Grant kept his focus on the monitor. We stabilize. We reassess. No sudden moves. The phrase felt layered. Clinical caution. Command compromise. Outside, a helicopter passed overhead, its low thrum vibrating faintly through the walls. The sound pulled everyone's attention for half a second, a reminder of how Hale had arrived. Fast. Urgent. Guarded. Ava checked the ventilator settings. Her hands were steady. She made sure of it. She knew what they saw when they looked at her. New insignia. Young face. No combat patch. What they didn't see were the extra rotations she'd volunteered for. The cardiac simulations she'd repeated until instructors stopped correcting her. The nights she'd spent memorizing protocols while others slept. None of that translated into combat credibility. And in this room, combat credibility carried weight. Calloway folded his arms, not defensive, just planted. He doesn't respond well to sedation shifts, he said quietly. That was new information. Valuable. Ava nodded once. Noted. No challenge. No ego. Just data. For a moment, the room found a fragile rhythm. Monitors beeping. Ventilator cycling. Gloves adjusting tubing. Boots shifting against tile. Two different chains of command occupying the same square footage. Grant spoke without looking up. Chief, we'll keep you informed of any changes. Calloway's reply was measured. I'm not leaving. It wasn't defiance. It was fact. Ava glanced at the monitor again. The arrhythmia deepened slightly. Subtle. Dangerous. She leaned closer, lowering her voice so only Grant could hear. We're heading toward electrical instability. Grant nodded once. Across the bed, Calloway was already watching them. He hadn't missed the shift in tone. In that trauma bay, rank insignia were visible. But influence was something else entirely. And everyone felt it. The rhythm on the monitor broke again. Not fully. Not yet. But it staggered. Ava saw it before anyone else reacted. His QRS is widening, she said. We need to correct this now. Grant stepped in beside her. Prepare another mag push. The tech moved. Calloway's voice cut across the room. Hold. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The tech froze mid-motion. Ava looked up slowly. Chief, we are past hold. He was stable 10 minutes ago. He was compensating 10 minutes ago. The difference mattered. Calloway stepped closer to the monitor, eyes scanning the numbers like he could will them into order. We adjust one variable at a time, he said. You start stacking interventions and you won't know what caused the crash. Grant exhaled through his nose. Chief, this is cardiac management, not demolitions. The comment landed harder than intended. One of the seals straightened slightly. Calloway's jaw shifted. You questioning my judgment, Commander? I'm asserting mine. The room tightened. This wasn't just clinical debate anymore. It was territorial. Ava moved toward the medication tray again. Administering magnesium. Calloway stepped directly between her and the 4-line. A deliberate block. You will not escalate without full review. Review, she repeated, incredulous but controlled. He doesn't have a pulse strong enough to wait for a committee. A couple of nurses at the perimeter exchanged glances. Word had started spreading down the hallway. Staff lingered near the partially open door, drawn by the tension. Public now. Calloway lowered his voice further, a controlled burn. You are speaking out of turn. I am speaking for my patient. He is not just your patient. There it was again. Ownership. Grant's tone sharpened. Chief, you do not outrank me in this room. Silence followed. Heavy. Measured. Calloway didn't raise his voice. He simply turned slightly toward the gathered SEALs. Secure the perimeter. 2 of them shifted position, stepping closer to the doorway. Not threatening, but unmistakably asserting presence. The hallway outside quieted immediately. The subtle message traveled fast, this situation belongs to us. Ava felt the temperature change. The hospital no longer felt like neutral ground. The monitor alarm intensified. Irregular. Closer to collapse. She stepped sideways, attempting to move around Calloway. He mirrored her. Not touching. Just blocking. You're compromising care, she said. You're rushing. Her hand tightened around the syringe. The tremor started in her fingers. She stilled it by locking her wrist. Across the room, a junior nurse hesitated before speaking. Ma'am, saturation's dropping. Grant nodded sharply. Increase oxygen. Calloway didn't object to that. Low-risk adjustment. Safe. But the rhythm on the screen twisted further. Ava saw the trajectory. She leaned toward Grant, voice tight but steady. If we don't shock soon, we lose the window. Calloway heard it anyway. No shocks. Grant looked at him fully now. On what medical basis? Calloway stepped closer to the foot of the bed. On operational history. That's not a diagnosis. It's context. Ava felt frustration burn behind her ribs. Context didn't restart a heart. The door opened wider. A hospital administrator stepped in, drawn by the escalating tension and the armed presence in her corridor. What's happening in here? She asked. Grant answered without looking away from the monitor. Cardiac instability. Calloway added evenly, and overcorrection. The administrator's gaze moved between uniforms and scrubs. The imbalance was visible even to her. Lieutenant Commander, she said carefully, is everything under control? Grant hesitated. That half-second hesitation cost him. Calloway filled it. We are ensuring disciplined response. Disciplined. The word reframed the narrative. Ava stepped forward again, refusing to shrink back in front of an audience. He is deteriorating, she said clearly. We need to act. Calloway turned to her. You will lower your tone. I am not raising it. You are challenging command authority. The administrator shifted uncomfortably. Grant finally snapped, Chief, this is not your command. The words echoed. Too sharp. Too late. Calloway's response was calm. No. But that is my operator. The SEALs behind him stood a fraction straighter. Public alignment. Ava moved decisively for the defibrillator. Charging to 200. The tech's hands hovered again. Eyes flicking toward Calloway. That was the worst part. Not the argument. Not the volume. The silent override. Calloway didn't look at the tech. He looked at Ava. If you discharge without authorization, he said quietly, you will answer for it. It wasn't a threat. It was procedural implication. Career weight. The administrator stepped back toward the door, unwilling to choose a side. Grant looked between them, calculating risk, medical and political. The monitor gave a jagged spike. Then a stuttering rhythm that could collapse at any second. Eva swallowed. Her voice dropped lower. Sir, every second we debate, he loses viable tissue. Calloway's stare didn't break. Stand down. Her knuckles whitened around the paddles. Around the room, no one moved. No one spoke. The SEALs watched. The staff watched. The administrator watched. Public. Humiliating. A clinical professional being ordered back from her own patient. The monitor shrieked again, longer this time. The rhythm began to unravel completely. Grant finally stepped forward. Charge. The tech jolted. But Calloway raised one hand. And the tech stopped. Total. Visible. Override. Ava felt something shift, not fear. Clarity. This wasn't caution anymore. It was control. And the patient's heart was paying for it. The monitor didn't flatline. It hovered. An unstable, flickering rhythm that refused to commit to life or death. The room stayed frozen around it. No one wanted to be the one who moved first. Grant stepped back half a pace, recalibrating. We reassess, he said evenly. No one touches anything for 10 seconds. 10 seconds in a trauma bay feels longer than a minute. Ava lowered the paddles slowly, but she didn't step away from the bed. Her eyes remained locked on the waveform. Something about it didn't match the narrative forming in the room. Calloway shifted his weight. Just slightly. For the first time since he'd taken control, he looked, not at Ava, but at the monitor with something sharper than authority. Recognition. It was subtle. But it was there. His baseline isn't consistent, Ava said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Grant glanced at her. Meaning. She hesitated. Because she wasn't entirely sure. The rhythm wasn't textbook ventricular collapse. It wasn't clean torsades. It wasn't pure asystole either. It was irregular in a way that felt engineered. She shook the thought away. That was impossible. Across the room, one of the SEALs leaned toward another and murmured something too low to catch. The second operator stiffened almost imperceptibly. Calloway noticed. His jaw tightened. Speak up, he said without turning. Nothing, Chief. Silence again. Too fast. Too contained. Ava watched that exchange from the corner of her eye. Something in the dynamic shifted, not rebellion, not exactly, but awareness. Grant leaned closer to the chart display. Electrolytes are correcting. Not fast enough, Ava replied. Calloway finally looked at her fully again. You seem very certain. It wasn't praise. It wasn't accusation. It was evaluation. She held his gaze. I'm certain that delay is making this worse. He studied her for a second longer than necessary. Then his attention moved to Hale's dog tags resting against his chest. Calloway reached out and adjusted them carefully so they wouldn't press into the surgical site. The gesture was gentle. Protective. Familiar. Ava noticed something else then. A faint scar along Hale's upper sternum, older than the current surgery. Clean. Precise. Not field trauma. She leaned slightly to get a better angle. Grant noticed her focus. What? Nothing, she said. But it wasn't nothing. Calloway saw her glance. His posture shifted, barely. Defensive. Vitals, he said abruptly. Report. The tech read numbers quickly. Oxygenation borderline. Blood pressure unstable. Electrical rhythm inconsistent. Grant folded his arms briefly, thinking. We could consult cardiology. The suggestion hung in the air. Calloway's response was immediate. No outside consult. Too immediate. Grant's eyes narrowed slightly. This is a hospital. And this is a sensitive case. The administrator was still near the door, pretending to review something on her tablet. She wasn't leaving. Ava felt it then. The unease. Not about Hale's condition. About the room. About the way certain information was being contained. Chief, she said carefully, choosing each word, does he have prior cardiac history? A beat of silence. One of the seals shifted again. Calloway answered without looking at her. Nothing relevant. Not no. Not yes. Nothing relevant. Grant picked up on it too. We need full disclosure if there's implanted hardware, prior procedures. There is nothing, Calloway cut in, tone controlled but firmer now, that changes immediate management. Immediate. The word felt deliberate. Ava looked back at the monitor. The rhythm glitched again, sharp spike, sudden dip, then partial recovery. It didn't behave like natural deterioration. It behaved like interference. She stepped closer to the equipment stack behind the bed, scanning connections. Leads secure. No visible malfunction. But something felt synchronized. The pattern shifts aligned almost too neatly with movement in the room. When voices rose, the rhythm faltered. When silence settled, it steadied. Coincidence, she told herself. It had to be. Grant exhaled slowly. We're missing something. Calloway's eyes flicked to him. Or you're overthinking. Ava reached toward Hale's wrist to check for peripheral pulse manually. Calloway's hand moved slightly. Not blocking. Just close enough to remind her he was there. She ignored it and completed the check. Weak. But present. Stronger than the monitor suggested. Her brow furrowed. Pulse doesn't match the waveform, she said quietly. Grant looked at the screen, then at her hand still resting against Hale's skin. Explain. I'm feeling more perfusion than I'm seeing. The room stilled. Calloway didn't speak. One of the seals swallowed. Barely audible. Grant stepped closer and checked himself. His expression didn't change, but his posture did. Subtle straightening. Recalculation. The monitor flickered again, then stabilized briefly into a narrow, fragile rhythm. Ava stepped back slowly. No one spoke for several seconds. The unease thickened. Not panic. Not revelation. Just the growing sense that the conflict in this room wasn't only about authority. Calloway finally broke the silence. Maintain observation, he said evenly. No triumph. No concession. Just control. But his eyes lingered on the monitor longer than before. As if he were waiting for something specific to happen. Or not happen. The administrator quietly stepped out into the hallway, whispering into her phone. Grant glanced toward the door, then back at Hale. We proceed carefully, he said. Carefully meant something different now. Ava adjusted the ventilator settings by a fraction. The machine responded normally. The heart rhythm did not. Another flicker. Another recovery. Almost as if it were choosing when to cooperate. Ava looked once more at the faint scar on Hale's chest. Clean line. Precise placement. Older than combat trauma. Her stomach tightened. She didn't say anything. Not yet. Because she wasn't sure. And in a room ruled by rank and silence, uncertainty could be used against you. The monitor beeped steadily for 3 long seconds. Then skipped again. And every person in the room felt it, something wasn't adding up. No one said it aloud. But no one dismissed it either. The rhythm dipped again. Sharp. Sudden. Then recovered. Ava didn't look at the monitor this time. She looked at Hale's chest. Specifically, at the faint surgical scar just left of his sternum. Not fresh. Not combat trauma. Too precise. Too deliberate. "Commander," she said quietly, "I need a closer look at his chest." Calloway's eyes snapped to her instantly. "You've looked." "Not at that." She gestured subtly toward the older scar. Grant leaned in. "That's not from today." "No," Ava said. The monitor glitched again, another jagged drop that didn't match the strength of the pulse still faintly pushing against her fingertips. She checked it again. Still there. Weak, but there. Stronger than the screen claimed. "His electrical output doesn't match perfusion," she said. Calloway folded his arms, but this time it felt less dominant, more guarded. "Be specific." "I am." Grant moved around to the opposite side of the bed. "Are you suggesting equipment malfunction?" Ava shook her head slowly. "No. That was the problem. It wasn't random. It was patterned." She reached behind the bed and traced the monitor leads again. Secure. No visible interference. Her gaze drifted to the portable ultrasound unit near the wall. Unused. Ignored in the chaos. "Get me imaging," she said. Calloway's jaw tightened. "For what purpose?" "To confirm mechanical activity. We already have electrical data." "That's exactly my concern." The room went quiet again. One of the SEALs shifted his stance, less rigid now. Watching her instead of blocking her. Grant studied her face. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't panicking. She was calculating. "Explain your concern," Grant said. Ava hesitated. Because saying it out loud without proof would sound reckless. But staying silent felt worse. "The rhythm collapses when external stress increases," she said carefully. "Raised voices. Physical movement. It stabilizes in controlled intervals." "That's coincidence," Calloway replied immediately. "Maybe." The word wasn't surrender. It was invitation. Grant glanced at the monitor as if testing the theory. The room stayed quiet. No one moved. The rhythm held. Narrow. Fragile. But steady. One of the junior nurses dropped a metal instrument tray across the room by accident. The sharp crash echoed. The monitor spiked violently, then dipped. Several heads snapped toward the screen. Then toward Ava. No one spoke. Calloway's expression didn't change. But his eyes sharpened. "Environmental interference," Grant murmured. "Or modulation," Ava replied softly. The word hung there. Modulation. Not malfunction. Intentional. Calloway stepped closer to the bed, studying Hale's chest with a different intensity now. "You're implying something implanted." "I'm saying I need to rule it out." Grant straightened slowly. "Implanted what?" Ava didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved to the ultrasound machine and powered it on without asking permission. The hum of the device filled the silence. Calloway didn't stop her this time. That was new. She applied gel just below the scar and pressed the probe down gently. The screen flickered to life. Grayscale images filled the monitor. Grant leaned closer. Ava adjusted the angle. There. A shadow. Small. Precise. Encased. Grant's voice lowered. That's not standard post-op hardware. No, Ava agreed. The monitor behind them fluttered again, but not into full arrest. Just enough to remind them it was listening. Calloway's voice was very controlled when he spoke. Classified medical modifications exist. It wasn't denial. It wasn't confirmation. It was warning. Ava kept her eyes on the ultrasound image. Then someone should have disclosed that before overriding treatment. Grant exhaled slowly. If he has an internal device affecting rhythm interpretation, then shocking blindly could destabilize it, Calloway finished. For the first time, the three of them were speaking the same language. Not rank. Not authority. Risk. The seals along the wall were no longer staring at Ava with suspicion. They were staring at the screen. At the shadow beneath Hale's ribcage. The near miss became clear in everyone's mind at once. If she had discharged earlier, if the paddles had connected, the outcome might have been catastrophic. The realization moved through the room like a silent wave. Grant looked at Ava differently now. Not as a junior nurse pushing back, but as someone who had seen something the rest of them missed. Calloway studied her for a long moment. You've seen this before, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Ava wiped excess gel from Hale's skin. Not exactly, she replied. Careful. Measured. Still holding something back. The monitor stabilized again into that narrow, artificial rhythm. Too consistent. Too deliberate. Grant crossed his arms slowly. We need confirmation from cardiology engineering. Calloway didn't respond immediately. His eyes stayed on Ava. You were very confident earlier, he said. She met his gaze. I was confident something didn't fit. The room felt different now. The power imbalance hadn't vanished. But it had shifted. Subtly. The audience in the hallway had thinned, whispers fading. Inside, tension remained, but it was no longer centered solely on her defiance. It was centered on Hale. On what had been done to him. On what no one had fully disclosed. The monitor beeped again. Steady. Artificially steady. Ava stepped back from the bed, but she didn't retreat. Grant looked at Calloway. Chief, what aren't we being told? Calloway's jaw tightened. For the first time since this began, he didn't immediately answer. And that silence said more than anything else so far. The silence stretched too long. Grant's question still hung in the air. Chief, what aren't we being told? Calloway didn't answer. The monitor continued its narrow, artificial rhythm. Too clean. Too contained. Ava wiped the gel from Hale's chest and stepped back half a pace. Then she looked at the administrator. Lock the doors, she said. The administrator blinked. They already lock them electronically. Override access. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't loud. But it carried something different. The administrator hesitated. Calloway's eyes shifted sharply toward Ava. You don't give orders here. Ava didn't look at him. She kept her gaze on the administrator. Ma'am. Lock. The doors. There was a fractional pause. Then the administrator reached for her tablet. The magnetic seals clicked. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Every seal in the room stiffened. Calloway turned fully toward Ava now. Explain yourself. She reached into the pocket of her scrub top. Slowly. No sudden movements. The seals along the wall reacted instinctively, hands shifting slightly toward concealed weapons. Grant noticed. Stand easy, he warned quietly. Ava pulled out a slim black credential card. Not standard hospital issue. She held it between two fingers. For a second, no one recognized it. Then Calloway did. His expression changed first. Not dramatically. Just a tightening around the eyes. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "I didn't get it," she replied. She flipped it around. The insignia was small. Subtle. Recognizable only if you knew what to look for. Defense Health Agency. Special Programs Division. Tier clearance marking. Grant stepped closer. "I wasn't briefed on, you weren't meant to be," Ava said calmly. The room shifted. Not with noise. With gravity. Calloway's voice lowered further. "State your authority." She met his gaze evenly. "Lieutenant Ava Ramirez. Attached to Joint Special Operations Medical Integration Unit. Temporary assignment under standard naval cover." The words were precise. Memorized. Official. No embellishment. One of the SEALs muttered something under his breath. Calloway didn't look away from her. "That unit doesn't deploy to domestic hospitals. Not unless there's embedded augmentation." Grant looked back at the ultrasound image still frozen on the screen. The shadow beneath Hale's sternum. Realization flickered across his face. "Embedded," he repeated. Ava nodded once. Senior Chief Hale was part of a classified survivability program. Subdermal cardiac modulation device. Adaptive signal dampening under high adrenaline stimulus. The monitor beeped again. Artificially steady. Calloway's jaw tightened. "You're saying his heart rhythm is being altered intentionally." "I'm saying the device is reacting to environmental stress and external electrical threat." Grant looked at the defibrillator paddles still resting on the tray. If she had shocked him earlier, the thought didn't need finishing. Calloway's posture shifted. Not defensive. Not dominant. Assessing. "You knew," he said. "I suspected." "You pushed anyway." "I tested the pattern before acting." The room was silent except for the steady mechanical beep. Grant stepped back slowly, processing. "You let this escalate," he said quietly to Ava. Her eyes flicked to him. "I needed confirmation without triggering the device." Calloway stared at her for a long moment. "You provoked environmental spikes." "Yes." The memory snapped into place for everyone. Raised voices. Sharp noises. Monitor fluctuations. She hadn't been losing control. She had been studying it. One of the SEALs exhaled softly. Almost a laugh. Almost disbelief. Grant shook his head once. "You could have said something." "And risked a classified system being discussed in an unsecured environment," she replied. The administrator swallowed visibly. The magnetic door lock suddenly made more sense. Calloway took one slow step closer to Ava. The distance between them narrowed. But the balance had flipped. "You allowed me to believe you were inexperienced," he said. "I allowed you to underestimate me." No arrogance. Just fact. The difference was surgical. The SEALs along the wall were no longer forming a barrier. They were watching her. Not as an outsider. As someone inside the circle. Calloway's voice dropped to near silence. "What's the corrective protocol?" A shift so subtle it could have been missed. He didn't order. He asked. Ava turned toward the ultrasound screen. "Reduce auditory stress. Minimize movement. No shocks. No aggressive pacing. The device will recalibrate if we remove external triggers." Grant immediately began issuing instructions. Lower alarm volumes. Non-essential personnel out. This time, no one hesitated. The tech moved instantly. The administrator stepped out quietly. Two of the SEALs exited without being told. The room softened. Noise dropped. Lighting dimmed slightly. Calloway looked at Hale. Then back at Ava. You were testing me, he said. I was testing the room. The monitor rhythm steadied. Not perfect. But organic now. Less forced. Grant checked the peripheral pulse again. Stronger. Matching. Calloway exhaled slowly. Not defeat. Recognition. You should have been briefed at a higher level, he said. I was, she replied. Another silence. Heavy. But different from before. The power dynamic had inverted without spectacle. Without shouting. Without humiliation. The change lived in posture. In eye contact. In who waited for whom to speak. Calloway stepped back half a pace. It was small. But unmistakable. What do you need? He asked. There it was. The moment. Clear. Unforgettable. Ava didn't smile. Didn't gloat. She adjusted Hale's 4 rate by a fraction. I need quiet, she said. The seals complied instantly. Boots softened. Arms lowered. No more wall. No more blockade. Grant glanced at her once more. Lieutenant, he said carefully. The title carried new weight now. Acknowledged. Earned. The monitor continued its steady rhythm. For the first time since Hale arrived, it felt like the room was working together instead of fighting itself. Calloway remained near the foot of the bed. But he no longer filled the space. He shared it. His eyes met Ava's one final time. Not challenge. Not dominance. Respect. And in that quiet exchange, the hierarchy had rewritten itself. The room stayed quiet long after the monitor stabilized. No applause. No visible relief. Just professionals adjusting to a new balance. Senior Chief Hale's rhythm continued under reduced stimulation, the modulation device recalibrating as Ava had predicted. His blood pressure steadied. Oxygen saturation improved gradually. Not dramatically. Realistically. Grant documented every change himself. No delegation. His notes were clinical, precise, careful about phrasing. Words like interdisciplinary conflict and unanticipated device interference replaced anything that sounded like blame. Calloway stood at the foot of the bed, hands resting lightly against the railing. He wasn't crowding the space anymore. He was watching. Not the monitor. Ava. She moved methodically. Adjusted medication. Checked perfusion. Repositioned leads to reduce artifact. Her voice remained even when issuing instructions. Lower the alarm threshold 2 points. Document modulation response interval. Maintain low auditory environment. No one hesitated now. The earlier tension hadn't vanished, but it had settled into something quieter. Heavier. 2 additional specialists arrived 20 minutes later. Cardiology engineering. Cleared access. Briefed privately by Ava in a corner of the room, voices low, controlled. Grant joined them midway through. Calloway did not. He remained with Hale. When the specialists finished their assessment, one of them approached Calloway directly. Device integrity intact, the specialist said. No external damage. Calloway nodded once. And operator prognosis. Guarded. But stable. The word stable carried weight. Not victory. Not guarantee. Just progress. The specialists left without ceremony. The administrator returned briefly, confirming the lockdown would be lifted in stages. No complaints filed. No formal incident report initiated, yet. Grant removed his gloves slowly and approached Ava. You'll need to submit supplemental documentation, he said. Yes, sir. His gaze held for a moment. You could have disclosed earlier. I needed confirmation, she replied calmly. He didn't argue. Because he knew she was right. Chain of command will review this, he added. I expect they will. There was no fear in her voice. Just acceptance. Across the room, one of the SEALs stepped forward. Younger than the rest. Less hardened around the edges. Ma'am, he said quietly. She looked up. Thank you. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. Just sincere. She nodded once. He did the rest. The SEAL gave a faint half-smile and stepped back. Calloway finally moved away from the foot of the bed. He approached her without urgency. The others instinctively gave them space. You let me push, he said. Yes. You let the room turn against you. I needed to see how the device reacted under command stress. He studied her face for a long moment. You calculated that I would escalate. I calculated that you protect your own. A slight exhale. Not quite a laugh. Not quite disapproval. You put a lot of faith in that. I didn't need faith, she said. I needed predictability. He absorbed that. No visible irritation. Just consideration. You understand that if you'd been wrong, he said evenly, your career would have taken the hit. Yes. And you proceeded anyway. Yes. The simplicity of the exchange made it heavier. Grant watched from a distance but didn't interrupt. Calloway extended his hand. Not for dominance. For acknowledgement. Ava looked at it for a fraction of a second before shaking it. His grip was firm. Measured. No more surprises, he said quietly. No more withheld information, she replied. A balanced correction. He gave a short nod. Fair. The doors unlocked fully an hour later. The corridor outside returned to normal traffic. Whispers faded. The hospital resumed its ordinary rhythm. Inside the trauma bay, the atmosphere had shifted permanently. Grant finalized the temporary care plan and signed off with his credentials. He paused before logging out. You'll brief Fleet Medical Command tomorrow, he said to Ava. Yes, sir. They won't be gentle. They don't need to be. He studied her once more. You were right, he said simply. Then he left. Calloway remained with Hale as the sedation level was adjusted downward slightly. The device continued to regulate rhythm without violent fluctuation. Ava prepared to rotate off shift. As she removed her gloves and disposed of them, she felt the delayed weight settle in her shoulders. Not doubt. Not triumph. Just exhaustion. One of the senior nurses approached quietly. You held your ground, she said. Ava shrugged lightly. So did he. The nurse considered that. Different kind of battlefield. Yes, ma'am. Before leaving, Ava stepped to the bedside one last time. She checked Hale's pulse again. Strong enough. She adjusted the sheet slightly to prevent pressure against the implant site. Calloway noticed. Lieutenant. She looked up. If there are future complications, he said carefully, you'll be informed earlier. It wasn't an apology. It was correction. I expect to be, she replied. He nodded once. Respect maintained. No dramatics. No speeches. Just professionals recalibrating after collision. As Ava walked toward the exit, the monitor behind her continued its steady, controlled rhythm. Not artificial now. Not manipulated by stress. Simply steady. And in that steadiness, the consequences settled quietly into place: career reviews, classified briefings, amended protocols. No revenge. No humiliation. Just accountability. On all sides. The trauma bay was empty now. Only the hum of the ventilator and the faint beeping of the monitors remained, echoing softly in the vast, sterile room. Ava Ramirez lingered near the doorway, gloves discarded, tablet in hand, observing the quiet aftermath of events that had felt monumental just hours ago. Outside, the corridor returned to normal. Staff walked briskly between patients, hushed conversations barely audible. To anyone passing by, nothing extraordinary had happened. But Ava knew better. She could still feel the weight of authority in the room, the subtle pressure, the watchful eyes, the invisible hierarchy that had defined every move, every word, every decision. For a long time, she had felt like a piece on someone else's board, manipulated by unseen hands. Tonight, she had glimpsed the other side of that power. The side where respect was earned quietly, and authority was proven not by rank alone, but by understanding and control. Calloway had returned to his post at the foot of the bed shortly after she stepped out. He didn't need to assert dominance anymore, he had learned to measure trust differently. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen unpredictability in practice and recognized it for what it was, not chaos, but a controlled challenge, a test of discernment. The seals around him mirrored that quiet recalibration, no longer rigid in anticipation, no longer tense with unspoken judgment. The dynamic had shifted. Subtly. Permanently. Ava moved down the hallway, every step echoing softly on the polished tile. She passed staff she had worked alongside for months, some of whom had quietly observed the standoff from doorways and alcoves. None said anything. None needed to. Her reputation had been reshaped silently. Actions mattered here more than words. She had learned it in medical school. She had learned it in the field. And tonight, she had learned it again in a military hospital where the rules were similar but invisible. She paused briefly in a small lounge, sipping the lukewarm coffee she had grabbed on her way back from the bay. Her mind replayed the events in fragments. The flatline. The hesitation. The tension of standing against Calloway, of having the authority she wasn't supposed to have. The moment when she had realized that Hale's cardiac modulation device was reacting to stress and that every intervention, or even a raised voice, could push him closer to collapse. She thought of the tiny signals that had almost gone unnoticed, the flicker in the monitor, the minute shift in a SEAL's stance, the faint scar along Hale's chest. It had all led to the revelation she had been careful to confirm before acting. The realization that this was bigger than a single patient's instability, bigger than a single conflict over authority, it was a lesson in observation, patience, and restraint. Authority, she realized, was never absolute. It was always conditional, always tested, always earned through demonstration rather than simply displayed. Calloway had carried authority like a shield, commanding every eye in the room, controlling space without threat. Yet even he had been tested tonight, by her choices, by her restraint, and by her calculated interventions. The balance of power had shifted not through force or volume, but through knowledge, precision, and composure under pressure. Ava reflected on her own emotions, which were subdued but keenly felt. Relief, yes, but not triumph. Satisfaction, but not pride. She had understood the consequences of every action, and she had accepted the risks knowingly. In the military, and especially in special operations, consequences were never abstract, they were immediate, tangible, and sometimes irreversible. Respect for authority, she realized, did not mean blind compliance. It meant understanding where power originated and how it could be leveraged responsibly. Later, she would file her report with Fleet Medical Command. She would summarize the events clinically, without dramatization. She would highlight the device, the interventions, and the calculated restraint that prevented unnecessary harm. But in that report, she could never fully convey the quiet lessons learned in the room, the subtle calibrations of human behavior, the invisible hierarchy, the way confidence and authority could be demonstrated without arrogance. Some things could only be felt, never written. Ava thought about Hale, unconscious but stable, recovering under devices and protocols that were classified beyond her clearance. He was more than a patient, he was a living demonstration of the stakes involved in decisions made under pressure, of the trust placed in those who acted with knowledge rather than assumption. She wondered if he would ever know how narrowly he had been shielded from error, how careful observation and restraint had preserved his life. Perhaps he would never know. Perhaps he didn't need to. She remembered Grant's reaction. Careful, measured, professional, but his eyes had betrayed curiosity and awe. Even seasoned officers, she realized, were not immune to the quiet demonstration of skill and judgment. Authority, experience, rank, they were all mutable when confronted with precision, understanding, and calm decisiveness. The hierarchy could bend without breaking when the right person acted at the right moment. Walking past the nurse's station, Ava noticed the junior staff glancing at her with something unspoken in their eyes, respect, yes, but also recognition. They had witnessed restraint and resolution, the demonstration of competence that transcended rank. Authority in this environment was not about control alone, it was about inspiring confidence through action, about stabilizing chaos without overstatement, about guiding those around you to trust both your judgment and your restraint. In that quiet reflection, she thought of all the times in her career when she had underestimated others, or been underestimated herself. How often had assumptions clouded perception? How often had authority been misapplied because it was assumed rather than earned? Tonight, the lesson had been made tangible. Actions measured against consequence created credibility. Observing before acting created respect. Restraint created trust. And sometimes, the people you underestimated held the key to survival. Outside, the sky over the base was dark, tinged with the faint orange of distant city lights. Helicopter blades from ongoing operations hummed far off, a reminder that the world outside the hospital still demanded action, still required decisions made under pressure, still respected authority, but not without merit. The quiet inside contrasted sharply with the ongoing operations outside, yet it carried the same lessons. Power, trust, respect, they were constant in both spaces, mutable only by how one chose to wield them. Ava paused near the exit, taking a long breath. She did not feel like a hero. She did not feel victorious. She felt measured. Balanced. Alert. Humble. Those who carried authority, she realized, carried responsibility that could not be shed by ego or rank. To wield influence wisely, one needed observation, patience, and a willingness to act decisively, but without arrogance. In the days ahead, consequences would unfold in paperwork, reviews, and debriefings. Careers could shift subtly. Professional reputations would be noted and reassessed. But the real consequences, the ones that mattered, were lived quietly in moments like tonight, a monitor flicker, a hand steadying a patient, a choice made or withheld, a calculated silence maintained until it was safe to act. Ava walked into the night, leaving the trauma bay behind. Her steps echoed softly along the empty corridors. Each step reminded her that authority was never static, that respect was earned through action, and that humility was the quiet companion of true competence. Leadership was not shouted. It was demonstrated. And in moments where stakes were high, those demonstrations revealed more than words ever could. She paused at the entrance, looking back once. The lights of the trauma bay glowed faintly through the glass. She thought of Hale, of Calloway, of Grant, of the SEALs, of every person who had been silently measured and recalibrated tonight. She knew that in the eyes of others, she might appear as she always did, young, capable, competent. But inside, she carried the knowledge of what had been required, not for recognition, but for survival, for integrity, for life. Authority, she reflected, was a fragile currency. It could be wielded carelessly or honored responsibly. Respect could be demanded, or it could be earned in silence. And the weight of choices, she knew, would follow those who understood both. A breeze moved through the entrance as she stepped outside. The night was quiet, save for distant hums of helicopters and base activity. Ava inhaled sharply. Calm. Controlled. Aware. She knew the lessons of tonight would remain long after the monitors were turned off, long after the report was filed, long after the immediate crisis had passed. Some lessons were quiet. Some carried weight only in reflection. Some would linger without comment, leaving an imprint on everyone who had witnessed them, even if subtly. She walked on, shoulders squared, not triumphant, not victorious, not seeking acknowledgement. Just aware. And in the silence of that night, the faint, steady rhythm of a saved life echoed in her mind. The truth settled softly in her chest: authority is not earned through force, it is revealed in restraint, observation, and respect, and remembered long after the room has emptied.